Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel and happy Halloween. And I'll be honest, for Halloween I was kind of struggling to come up with what concept I wanted to do a video on. Cause you know, I could talk about like scary movies or demons or whatever, but that's just like me any other day of the year. So I decided for Halloween, why not talk about the one thing that truly deeply terrifies me, and that is the ocean. See, I suffer from immense thalassophobia, and it's not like a specific fear of sharks or water or swimming or anything like that. It is the infinite depths of the ocean itself. There have been countless stories throughout history of the largest grave on Earth taking in people and refusing to give them back. For humans, the majority of our fear revolves around the idea of the fear of the unknown, and the ocean itself has proved to be the one unknowable consequence of this world. There is such a horrific nature to the fact that it just exists that it's almost mesmerizing. And to prove that today, I'm going to tell a few stories of ocean mysteries that not only terrify me, but I think get across the point of why the ocean itself is so mysterious. At least that's what I'm going to start doing. This may get into a rant of me just talking about krakens and ocean monsters, but we'll see how it goes. And through these stories of ghost ships, sea monsters, and the other unexplainable, I hope that maybe today we can take a look at what is, in my opinion, the scariest thing on Earth. But before we break down all of my deepest, darkest fears, let's talk about something even more horrifying. Poor hygiene. And trust me dudes, I know that as a dude, we like to be disgusting for some reason. And even though it's Halloween, I have come again to tell you about a product that will make your life way less terrifying, and that is today's sponsor, Manscaped. I've talked about it before on this channel, and I'm gonna do it again because as always, it is a fantastic product. It takes what would otherwise be this expansive, complicated route of what do I need and what don't I need, and compiles it all into one package for you. And today I've come to tell you about their newest kit that you can get a hold of, the Performance Package 4.0. To start off, the Performance Package comes with the brand new Lawnmower 4.0, which is not only a sleek and very well working electric razor, but it also works as a handy dandy flashlight. It also includes the Weed Whacker nose and ear trimmer, because if there's one thing I think we can all agree on, it's that nose and ear hair are gross. Here comes the part where I squirt this into my hand and make a mess everywhere. There is a lot in my hand because I keep messing up this take, but the Crop Moisturizer is a very long-lasting, quick-absorbing moisturizer that keeps you refreshed and energetic all day. As well as the Cooling Aloe Vera and Anti-Inflammatory Toner Spray, which you can just give yourself a couple fritz and you are good to go for the day. And with Manscaped's Peak Hygiene Plan, you will be able to get replenishing amounts of all of this straight to your door, hassle-free. And for a limited time, if you get the Performance Package 4.0, you will be able to also get this free Manscaped travel bag, which is actually a solid material and not your standard like great value stuff. As well as the Manscaped Anti-Chafing Boxer Briefs, which once again is high quality and not painful. So I've brought all this to you to say that if you go to the link in the description and use discount code Wendigoon at checkout, you will be able to get everything I mentioned for 20% off and with free shipping. That is right. Once again, link in the description, discount code Wendigoon. You will be able to get the Performance Package 4.0, the 2 free gifts, all for 20% off and free international shipping. Thank you all so much for watching this ad. Thank you so much to Manscaped for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. I hope that you enjoyed. Check them out, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. To start out, if I'm making a video about ocean mysteries, then I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about the most famous ghost ship of all of history, the Mary Celeste. Well, you may be asking, what is a ghost ship? And we're going to find out right now. The Mary Celeste was a ship originally built in the 1860s, and this wasn't a small ship either. It was 103 feet long and 25 feet wide. The ship was originally called the Amazon before it was in a wreck and salvaged and reconverted into the Mary Celeste. So if you believe in bad karma and juju, this ship was already off to a bad start. The next year, the ship was bought by a man named Winchester, who hired a captain by the name of Benjamin Spooner Briggs, and no, that was his real name. Captain Briggs was to take the ship on its maiden voyage from New York City to Genoa, Italy. Briggs himself was a seasoned sailor, as you can imagine with a name like that, and handpicked a crew of not only his close friends, but other trained professionals. After stopping in New York, the ship loaded up on 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, or in other words, pretty much ethanol. Like, it's still alcohol, but you wouldn't use it to drink. Captain Briggs also brought his wife and young daughter along, which was a thing that I guess people did back then. So between him, his family, and the crew, there was a total of 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste. And on November 5th, they set sail across the Atlantic to Italy. That was the last time that any of the crew was ever seen again. 8 days after the Mary Celeste set sail, the Di Grazia, which had left from another nearby port, was basically on their track and going to a similar location. It was then on December 4th that the Di Grazia spotted a ship simply floating in the middle of the ocean. This is a weird thing to happen, so the captain of the Di Grazia tried to make contact with the floating ship. Upon coming up to this ship, the captain noticed two really alarming things. For one, the sails seemed to be in a sort of in-between state, as in some of them were furled out and some of them were folded up, kind of implying that it was at a transition period, as well as the much more alarming fact that there was nobody on board, which is probably a bad thing. This ship that had been found completely abandoned was the Mary Celeste. It was found in this state 600 miles off the coast of Gibraltar, which, while closer to Europe than the original starting point for sure, was still basically the middle of open ocean. The captain of the Di Grazia sent two of his men to go search the Mary Celeste, to which this is the site that they came across. Upon getting on deck, they noticed that several aspects of the ship were in a sort of ruffled condition. To start off, several of the ropes were tied to the sides of the ship, and the ropes themselves dangling over in the water, implying that someone had untied something and quickly tossed the rope into the water behind them. Two of the covers to the lower parts of the ship were wide open. This is traditionally a bad thing to do, especially in long periods, because if there's any rain or dew, it will get down into the lower parts of the ship, as well as a large device that holds the compass and other measurement devices was cracked on its glass and pushed over out of its place, which normally wouldn't be a big deal, but these are massive pieces of metal, and it's not like someone would just pick up a 300-pound block and set it over for no reason. There was also something known as a sounding rod laying on the deck. A sounding rod is basically a makeshift device that's used to determine water depth within a ship. Or in other words, if you feel that there's water within your ship, you can use a sounding rod to see how bad the situation is, and it was just lying there on the floor of the deck. We'll come back to that one later. Perhaps most notably, one of the lifeboats was missing. Not only that, but the rope that was in the place of where the lifeboat would have been located was not untied, but cut. See, when you're out in the middle of the ocean, and especially as a sailor, you've only got a limited amount of rope, so you wouldn't cut it unless you were in a really big hurry. Upon further investigation in the ship, within the cabin they found the captain's log. Captain Briggs logged everything from the hours, so there was a very intense and descriptive description of everything that happened within the boat up until 8 a.m. on November 25th. Because of this, we can safely assume that whatever happened to the Mary Celeste happened between 8 and 9 a.m. on November 25th. That would mean that this event occurred 9 days before its discovery. And given the coordinates that the captain logged at 8 a.m. on November 25th, that would also place it 400 miles away from wherever this thing happened. And one of the strangest things of this entire mystery is absolutely everything was in its place. Everyone's personal supplies, all of the food rations, and the alcohol barrels were all in their respectable locations as if nothing had happened. The only thing that could not be found was the captain's personal navigation equipment. In the very bottom hold of the ship, there was about 3.5 feet of water. Now you may be thinking that that sounds like a really bad thing and the ship is sinking. That's actually a pretty normal amount. See, back when boats were made of, like wood, they weren't exactly sealed up all the time and it wasn't uncommon for water to seep in. Also, the deck itself wasn't exactly airtight either. So if there was something like rain, all of that rain would go down into the bottom of the boat. There were pumps in place in order to get water out of the bottom whenever that happened, and the 3.5 feet indicate that the water hadn't been pumped for some time. That's the purpose of the sounding rod I meant earlier, because you could eyeball the water in the bottom of the boat, and it's a very thin line between, we need to pump it and everyone needs to leave right now. The Di Grazia, which is the ship that found the Mary Celeste, decided to bring it into port in order to get the salvage earnings. See, the way it used to work is if you found salvage or some sunken treasure or something along that line, and you were to bring it into port and sell it back to either a state government or a private ownership or whatever, whoever bought the supplies would pay you a handsome finder's fee for recovering the wreckage. So the captain of the DeGradia, seeing a literal empty floating ship full of potential money, decided to bring it into port. However, because he was trying to get money for it, there was a sort of trial held to determine if the ship was gained by moral means, basically confirming that the captain wasn't trying to commit some elaborate form of insurance fraud. Overseeing this trial was a man by the name of Attorney General Flood. And I have to mention this because it's too funny not to. In research for this, there was one historian who said, and I quote, "He was a man whose arrogance and pomposity were inversely proportional to his IQ." Pomposity. That is a fantastic word. I'm keeping it. During the course of this trial, they went through a whole slew of different theories of what happened to the crew of the ship. See, the most crucial piece of evidence, and really the only piece of evidence that anyone has, is the fact that one of the lifeboat tethers was cut, implying that with whatever happened, someone had an opportunity to try to get away. Not only that, but it had to be a pretty desperate situation if they cut the ropes in order to get off in what's pretty much the middle of the ocean. One of the initial theories that got tossed around was the idea of a giant storm that came through and wrecked the ship to a point that they thought it was sinking and everyone left. And remember, there were more lifeboats, so the idea that everyone hopped on one and hurriedly cut it implied that they thought something was happening right away, or the winds of the storm were threatening to capsize the boat. However, an investigator who was sent to look at the ship found several open vials of both ink and oil setting up on tables, which, as you could imagine, if it was a massive storm that was threatening to sink the boat and the waves were tossing it around, those vials wouldn't just be sitting there upright, not having been spilt. And also, all of the alcohol barrels and personal belongings would be all over the place if that was the case, but like I said, everything was in perfect order. That Attorney General Flood that I mentioned earlier really had some dumb ideas about this. He was convinced that there was foul play involved in some way just for eventually this new captain to bring the boat in for insurance fraud, or technically salvage fraud, but pretty much same thing. But this captain is a seasoned captain who's been working for years and makes good money. And Captain Briggs was also a seasoned captain who was making good money doing what he's doing. So it doesn't make sense for them to ruin their whole careers and livelihoods just to make a quick buck. That didn't stop the Attorney General from getting some weird evidence. Like, for example, there was a sheathed sword found underneath Captain Briggs's bed. While which, inspecting the sword, there was something that he said could have been blood. As well as on the deck of the ship, there was other stuff that he said could have been blood. And if it sounds like I'm being vague with those descriptions, that's because he was also being vague with those descriptions. His theory was that the crew members got really drunk, killed the captain and his family, and then took the one lifeboat and just paddled out to sea. Now, this doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. For one of his points of evidence was that whenever those two men I mentioned earlier, the first ones who got on board the Mary Celeste, whenever those two guys went down beneath deck, they said they could smell alcohol, because if you'll remember, the ship was shipping alcohol. However, this Attorney General took that to mean that the guys were drunk, and I guess totally just ignored the over 1,000 barrels of ethanol that were stored in the ship, even though there are absolutely no signs of a struggle or a murder or anything of the like. This Attorney General was so adamant about this theory that whenever the owner of the ship, Winchester, came over to Europe in order to, get his ship back, the Attorney General immediately began accusing him of how he would be so evil as to allow such a crew of rapscallions to kill a good captain and his family. To which I imagine Winchester was like, "What?" And the two got into several heated arguments in court over this before it was eventually decided that no one had any idea what happened to the ship. Also, remember the whole blood on the sword thing and blood on the deck thing? Someone analyzed that and it wasn't blood, it was like rust and dirt. And by the time the trial was over, the Attorney General paid the captain of the DeGradia like a third of what it should have been, because the Attorney General was still poopy that, they didn't stab each other and it was like a bloody fight or whatever. But that doesn't answer the question of what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste. Well, there were several people who still believed the insurance scam story, or the idea that Briggs had put this whole thing together in order to get money off the ship, but again, it was way less than he was making as a captain anyway. And also, that still doesn't change the idea that why would he take not only his crew but his wife and young daughter out to open ocean in order to make a few bucks. Another popular theory at the time was pirates, because pirates were in fact a problem in the 1800s. However, as I mentioned earlier, there was no signs of a struggle or anything likewise, and also if it was pirates, it would be weird for pirates to kidnap people, not take anything on the ship, including one of the 1,000 barrels of alcohol, and then never hold any of that crew they kidnapped for ransom. Because, you know, pirates are in it for the money and the gold and all that stuff. So for them to just kidnap people and then seemingly not do anything with them doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, that doesn't explain the lifeboat thing. People are still so questioning over this whole story that there was one theory that a historian did in the 20s where he said that perhaps because Captain Briggs was religious, he decided to become a fanatic and murdered everyone, threw them overboard before committing suicide and somehow not leaving any trace of this. I should also mention that historian apologized to the family after he did it because, yeah, that may be a little... And that's coming from the guy who's about to say the Kraken did it. Two of the more popular theories was that it was either a waterspout or a sea quake. In other words, like a small tornado on the ocean or an earthquake, because that may cause enough turbulence and enough water being thrown around that the ship may begin to sink. However, if it was something like a waterspout that was big enough that it threatened to sink the ship, there would have been, for one, a lot more water in the bottom of the ship, and also everything wouldn't have been as neatly packed as it was. And the same thing can be said about the sea quake. If it was an earthquake that this seasoned captain and his entire seasoned crew thought was at risk of drowning them all, then why was everything in such a perfect condition? Also, the whole lifeboat thing doesn't make sense for either of those. Like, sure, that may make sense for why they were in such a hurry and everyone piled into one and cut the ropes, but if you're in a tornado and, like, as a seasoned captain, you're not going to be like, quick, everyone get onto the much smaller boat in the middle of the ocean. Don't get your stuff. There's no time. One theory that I think holds more weight than most of them is that of the explosion. See, denatured alcohol or ethanol has a problem with producing vapors that have a tendency to blow up. And in the captain's log that I mentioned earlier, he had mentioned throughout the trip that they just heard random explosions coming from beneath the deck, because I guess that's just a thing that happens. So perhaps one day there was a rather large explosion, and that may explain why both of the lower deck doors were open whenever the two men came on board, implying that they were trying to air out the bottom cargo hold. And in 2005, the Channel 5 broadcasting station actually recreated this theory, and it turns out that even if there is a very large vapor explosion and a very large fireball, it wouldn't destroy any of the interior. That was the issue everyone had with the explosion theory, because whenever they walked into the bottom deck, everything was fine, and you could probably tell if it, blew up. But these vapor explosions are just a quick fireball, and there's no lasting damage. However, as I mentioned, the captain had logged in his book that this had been happening over the course of the entire journey. And again, none of these guys were rookies. So I can't imagine a scenario in which a slightly bigger one of these fireballs go off and they're all like, we should paddle into open ocean just to be safe. So that still leads into the mystery of what happened to the Mary Celeste. And I think I've been respectful and reverent enough of the dead that I can now say it was the Kraken. The Kraken definitely did it. I didn't mention this detail earlier because it was too dumb at the time, but one of the notes that the Attorney General said in his entire case is that the front of the ship there were several scratch marks. These weren't like enough to puncture into the boat or anything, but they were enough to be noticeable. The Attorney General's theory was that after the crew got drunk and murdered the entire family, they swam around to the front of the ship and cut it in order to make people think that it ran aground in the middle of the ocean. However, that's lame. Wouldn't it be a lot cooler if a Kraken swam up there and it was latched onto the front and that's why the scratch marks are there? And then while everyone's on deck, it just starts grabbing people with these giant tentacles, and then a couple people try to get away by hopping on a lifeboat and cutting it real quick before they too get sucked underwater or float out to sea and die of the elements, whichever's worse. And you know the best part about that theory is you can't tell me I'm wrong, because cameras didn't exist yet and neither did I, so we're moving on. I think one of the reasons that the Mary Celeste is such a well-known story and so infamous too among people like me who are absolutely terrified of the ocean is because it kind of embodies a lot of the things that make me afraid of it in the first place. It is absolutely unexplainable, And your imagination is pretty much the deciding factor in whatever could have happened to these people. Because just like with the ocean itself, if we're taking a scenario that is so beyond our minds of anything that we can know or understand, then our deepest fears might as well be the truth. And if you're thinking, well, that was in the 1800s and people just used to die back then, which, to be fair, people did just up and die for no reason back then, then allow me to turn your attention to the Kaz II. I'm going to call it Kaz, whatever. Now, the Kaz II was admittedly shorter than the Mary Celeste, boasting a 32-foot span. However, it was still a yacht-class vessel and definitely capable of sailing in the ocean. On April 15th in 2007, a three-man crew decided to go out on a recreational expedition aboard the Kaz II. They set out from Queensland, Australia, and from everything that I've read of the family members of the people who were on the boat, it seems that they were just going to spend a few days going from different docks and sailing about at sea. That was until on April 18th, a helicopter spotted the boat and noticed that there didn't seem to be anyone on it. After some reports and investigations, eventually on April 20th, the boat was found and boarded about 88 miles off the coast of Australia. And similar to the Mary Celeste, whenever they got onto the boat, the entire crew was missing. Now, notably, the situation aboard the Kaz II was noticeably more unnerving. There was food laid out on plates along with silverware, implying that everyone was just about to sit down to eat. The laptop was open and still on, implying that someone had just been using it. Even the engine was running. Everything pointed towards the idea of everyone simply just hiding as if the boat was being used only moments ago. Furthermore, all the life jackets were still hung up and none of them being used. The GPS was still working along with all distress functions that the boat had, although none of them had been activated. Even more so, on the front of the boat, the small life raft as well as the anchor were still tied up and not being used, meaning that it seemed no one tried to stop the boat or make an escape. The one thing that was amiss on the boat is that one of the sails were very badly shredded, as if something had cut through them and torn them until they were useless. The police were able to use the GPS that was on the boat in order to backtrack the path that the Kaz II took. And then on the GPS path, you can see the boat go out from port on the first day of their journey, slow down all at once, and then just start drifting until it was eventually found. As if the boat was just sailing out, and then for some reason, the engine went into neutral, and those three guys just disappeared off the face of the earth. Besides from the sail, the only one thing that, doesn't really count as a miss was the fact that the lure from the fishing pole was hooked into one of the side ropes off the side of the ship, which also paints another picture of what was happening when this all went down. They were out fishing, there was a pair of sunglasses found sitting on one of the front chairs on the boat, and there was a coffee mug on the back deck just sitting on a table. Again, the whole picture implies that everyone was about to eat, they were out fishing, they were bathing in the sun, and then just disappeared. Now, unlike the Mary Celeste, this is a modern investigation, so there had to be a modern proceeding of how this all went out, because three people can't just disappear and then the government not do anything about it. So at the final investigation, where they went into the whole story of what probably happened, the coroner's report, which it sounds weird for a coroner to give a report with no bodies, but I digress. In the coroner's report for what he proposes might have happened, it sounds like a slapstick comedy. Like, his story was that one of the guys got his hook stuck on that rope on the side that I mentioned earlier, and when he bends down to pick it up, he just falls in the water, to which the second guy says, "Don't worry, buddy, I'll come get you," and he jumps off the boat, but he forgot to turn the engine off, so the third guy puts the engine in neutral, and then he undoes the sail, but the sail swings all the way around the boat and smacks him and throws him off the side. So his idea was, in the span of 30 seconds, all three of them were so incompetent that they managed to like three stooge their way into the ocean. But as far as official reports go, that's all that we got. But despite that, as well as large-scale searches along the coast of Australia, no evidence of them was ever found. And what's so shocking about this in particular is you imagine that someone who's taken every precaution between the GPS and the radio equipment and all of that would not have the capability to go missing in the modern world. However, that's exactly what happened. And this is a much more recent occurrence, and the families of those who were lost are still alive, so I am not going to make a joke that it was a kraken, so I'm just going to move on. And you may be listening to all this and thinking, well, that sounds pretty creepy. I guess I'll just stay on land where I'm safe. But see, that's how the ocean gets you. And to prove that there is no safety from the most disturbing thing on the entire planet, look no further than the Flannan Isles Lighthouse mystery. Off the west coast of Scotland, there is a series of small islands known as the Flannan Isles, with one of the largest being that of the Elanemore Island. In 1899, a very large lighthouse was built on Elanemore Island as a way of signaling sailors who were coming into port. Our mystery begins on December 7th, after the new relief comes in order to stock the island with its new set of wikis. I love that word. See, there were 4 workers who worked at the Elanemore Lighthouse year-round, and they worked in 2-week shifts. In other words, there's always 3 people on the island, and every 6 weeks someone gets to take a break, and it rotates like that. So on December 7th, they make their trade. The relief comes to stay on the lighthouse, as the guy who's taking a break is able to go back to shore. So the 3 men within the lighthouse should not come into contact with anyone else for 2 weeks. However, something weird was noted on December 15th whenever a boat that was coming into shore did not see the light from a lighthouse, which is, again, a bad thing. See, lighthouses have to be on all the time when it's night, because even if it's a perfectly clear night, a ship coming in may not see the island and may hit it, which, again, bad thing. So for the lighthouse to not be shining, either those guys are really slacking off or something's wrong. On December 20th, which would have been the normal relief time anyway, a crew tried to go out to the island. However, there was an uncharacteristically thick fog at the time, and they weren't able to go until the 26th. As a matter of fact, on December 7th, whenever those 3 were placed on the island in the first place, there was a mention of a fog beginning to settle in the area. And again, at the 20th, it was so bad that they couldn't even make their way to the island. Whenever the relief boat finally got to the island, they came to the east dock and for one, saw that there were several boxes and supplies sitting on the dock that hadn't been brought up to the lighthouse yet. Furthermore, there was no one to greet them and no signal that a ship was coming in. See, lighthouses are always supposed to be on the watch, and there's always someone looking for ships to come off the coast. So if a ship's coming towards you, you're supposed to raise a specific kind of flag in order to indicate it, although that hadn't happened. The relief vessel, thinking this is weird, shoots a flare into the air and sounds the whistle, but no one comes out to greet them. So they decide to send a small search party to shore to see what they can run into, and this is the sight that they find. The fenced-in gate to the front of the lighthouse entrance was closed, as well as the front door of the lighthouse itself. Furthermore, inside the lighthouse itself, every other door was also closed. All of the beds were unmade, and food had been set out as if someone, again, was in the middle of eating and just going about their day. Now, there's also a mention here that all of the clocks were stopped, and while I really wish that was a super creepy thing, as if there's some weird time glitch happening here, the way clocks worked back then is you had to wind them up, so that just means no one wound them up in a while. I know, we were really close to like time ghost stories, but don't worry, I'll try to make it fun. And among the belongings of the 3 men who were staying at the lighthouse, one of their coats was still present. See, this is on the ocean in northern Scotland in December. There was no way anyone was stepping outside, much less doing work outside, without wearing their coat. So the fact that one of the coats was still hung up next to the door implies that someone didn't have intention to go outside when whatever this was happened. So the entire relief party does a huge search and comb over of the island. Now, if you remember earlier, I said they arrived at the east dock. Whenever they went to the west dock, they did find some weird stuff. The west dock seemed to have been completely destroyed, with iron bars ripped out of the ground and cracks in the dock itself and wood thrown everywhere, and some reports even saying a giant several 100-pound boulder had been rolled across the dock. Now, while searching everything within the first wiki's logbook of the island, I still love that word, he had mentioned that the west dock did need repairs and there were several broken things. However, from my reading, he didn't say anything to the effect of like the entire dock is destroyed. It was kind of just general repair stuff. So for whatever reason, it seems that the west dock had gotten worse. Keep in mind the contrast between that and the east dock that the crew arrived on, where there were just boxes sitting around everywhere. Within this log that I mentioned a moment ago, there was a day-by-day account of everything that had happened on the island itself. These were general readings of barometric pressure and how many ships were spotted. However, it noted the intense fog that I mentioned earlier, as well as very turbulent weather. Now, here's the thing, right? This island, while yes, off from shore, it isn't like horribly off from shore. As a matter of fact, there was a guy I'm going to mention in a second whose job was to live on his home near the coast and report that he could see the light from the lighthouse every night. So it's close enough to shore that you can make visual contact with it. However, there were no storms reported within this time period. And again, it's right next to shore, so if there were these massive storms that were mentioned in the logbook, someone should have known about it. Remember that guy I said who his entire job was to make sure that he could see the light every night? Well, when he was questioned about it, he said that the fog was so thick that you could only see it on the night of the 12th, and every other night he couldn't even make out the island or the light or anything. And my favorite part about this entire story is the second wiki's log of what had happened. And I know that historically there's been some people who have said there's no way to validate if this is real or not, and I'll be honest, I don't care. This is my favorite part of the story. In the assistant wiki's log, which complemented the main wiki's log that I mentioned earlier, the assistant spoke of how the storms were getting worse and worse by the night. As the official log was saying that the storms were getting worse, the assistant began to say things like the storm is so bad it's causing all of the men to begin to pray, along with saying that now the men are beginning to cry and they don't know what they're going to do. The last entry of the original logbook was on December the 15th, specifically on 9 a.m. of December 15th, which if you'll remember, the night of December 15th is when the boat that was passing by said the light wasn't on. And also, if the storms were this dramatic, I imagine the boats passing by the island would also have mentioned them. So we can assume that whatever happened to this crew happened within 9 a.m. on December 15th to whenever that ship passed on the same day as well. To which the only entry for December 15th in the second hands log is storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. And there was never another entry, and the crew of the Elaine Moore Lighthouse were never seen again. Alright, so now that I've got all the pieces there, I can put my evil puzzle together. I also want to mention I'm not the only one to make it a weird thing. There are stories within the Flannan Isles that there's these 3 crows that stalk the island, and that those crows are the spirits of these 3 men, or in some cases quite literally the men got turned into birds for some reason. The area of the Flannan Isles is notorious for its legends of sea monsters. Several stories of mermaids and sirens that lure men to their death, as well as creatures known as sprites, which I am not kidding, will hop onto your boat and then drown you if you do not beat them in a rhyming duel. So these are underwater mermaid things that rap battle you or else they kill you. I don't even have to add anything to that. That speaks for itself. I'm moving on. The story that I love to go with, and the one that terrifies me so much, is perhaps the men were being judged or some form of supernatural occurrence was happening within that fog that settled over the island. Think about it, a fog so thick that no one on the island could see them on shore, and within that fog themselves they reported there being severe thunderstorms that got to the point that they were praying and crying and everything else before he said God is over all, and they all disappeared off the face of the earth. Now, do I believe in that? Probably not, but I really want to. And similar to my Mary Celeste thing, what are you gonna do? Tell me no? That's no fun. See, it's stories like that that captured the mystique of the ocean, or the idea that no matter how much we discover about it, there's still so many ridiculously unanswered questions that there's never going to be a way for us to bottle it up and then figure out every piece of it. Because just like with the Elaine Moore Lighthouse, how do you naturally explain that? Other than the fact that a giant mist came and settled in, put the men through the trials of God and turbulent storms before they went to the West Dock and the Kraken destroyed it as it dragged the men into the sea. I really don't see what the hang up with you believing it is. And what's so interesting to me about this is these ideas of ghost ships and ocean creatures are by no means anything new. Think of stories like the Flying Dutchman, old legends of ghost ships that would pass you, and then on deck there would be the souls of sailors who have died who ask you to give a message to their loved ones back at home. Isn't that just horrific in like the best way? Or the fact that every old world nation had pictures of giant sea serpents drawn off the map, with the idea that if you go too far off the map there will be monsters. Or the idea that every religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, all of it, have some legend of a giant leviathan that lurks beneath the waters. Or legends like the Kraken. Don't we think it's weird that for literally hundreds of years every single civilization had stories of this giant octopus thing that would attack ships and then kill sailors and wreck the ship. And we were all collectively like, haha, weren't those guys idiots? And then, you know, like 30 years ago, we found colossal squids that are like the size of 4 school buses. And we're like, oh, look, they are real. But aren't those stories stupid and fake? Haha, they definitely didn't kill people. In some cases, with things like that, we understand the colossal squid to exist, and we understand them to be ferocious predators. It's almost comforting to think that situations like the Mary Celeste could be caused by something so explainable. It's as if we would be fortunate to wrap our heads around these paranormal instances that occur. And I could go into a whole rant now about the Bermuda Triangle, but I'll be honest, that's like surface level stuff, like compasses work funny here. Like we're down here, we're way past that. And way past that, we can get into the modern stories of sea monsters being found. Like for example, in 1848, there was a British naval ship known as the Daedalus. The entire crew of the Daedalus attested the same story of seeing a 100-foot long massive sea serpent off of the side of their ship. They said it slithered along the side of the ship before diving underwater. There are several drawings and depictions put together of what this creature looked like. And if you think for some reason the entire crew was just high and had no idea what they're talking about, the United States brig known as the Daphne also saw the exact same thing, and they didn't only see it within the same month, they fired their guns at it and chased it down, saying that it was a giant ocean monster. So you have 2 different militaries, both full of very experienced crewmen, who one of them shot at it and then tried to run it down, and historians have said that it was probably a whale. I hate that. That makes me more upset than anything. Whenever there's a story like this, people can't just be like, oh, I guess we'll never know. They give it the stupidest explanation. Like, yeah, 400 experienced crewmen who have, seen every kind of whale imaginable, they were probably just dumber than I am. More recently, during World War I, there were other stories of ocean monsters being found. In 1950, a German U-boat sank a British ship off the coast of Ireland. The British ship was holding explosives, and after it went just beneath the water, the explosive blew up, to which the entire crew of the German U-boat said that they saw what they called a 60-foot crocodile get shot out of the water before landing belly up and then sinking underneath. What is a 60-foot crocodile doing off the coast of Ireland? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Maybe it just ate the crew of the Flannan Lighthouse. We'll never know. In the same war, in 1918, there was a German U-boat that a British ship came across, to which the U-boat was just sitting on top of the water and immediately surrendered. After the British brought the Germans on board, the captain of the U-boat had said that they were just going about their day when they were attacked by a massive sea monster that destroyed all of their guns and then made them go to the surface, and they surrendered because they were afraid it may come back. Like, there's groups of people seeing monsters, sure, and then there's an entire submarine surrendering to the enemy because they're scared. So with stories like this, you may ask yourself, where did all these things go? If they were so active and attacking ships for hundreds of years, where did they seemingly just disappear to? Well, one of the more popular theories is the idea of vertical migration, or in other words, super predators that we know of, like colossal squids, and again that we know of and we're just okay with them existing. They have been known to dive deeper whenever there is increased traffic around their normal grounds. Or at least we've seen other squid do that and can assume the colossal squid does that. We haven't really seen them in the wild, which is even more terrifying. So if we know that smaller fish and creatures in the ocean dive down if there's a bunch of stuff around where they're at, then what's to say that these massive super predators wouldn't do the same with increased traffic along waters? In 2003, a group of researchers pinned a tag on a great white shark which was about 9 feet long. The purpose of this was to observe migration routes and where the shark went along its journey. However, years later, they found the tag just washed up on shore somewhere. This was weird, so whenever they analyzed the tag, which is pretty much a black box, they could see that the shark was just going about his day before immediately getting sucked to 1,600 feet below sea level, at breakneck speeds way faster than something a great white shark can pull off diving straight down, implying that something took said shark and then brought it down to where the big boys play at. I spoke of something in my conspiracy theory iceberg series known as the ocean at night theory. Short version is essentially they made this giant thermal reactor and set it on the ocean as a means of cooling it, but what it accidentally caused was a bunch of super predators to swim up to the surface, which led to a theoretically like Cthulhu-sized creature attacking a group of researchers and militaries, which is comforting. But if massive creatures, and some of which we know to exist, have gone underwater in order to get away from us, then what's to say they can't get the courage to come back up? There's ships such as the USS Scorpion, which is an American submarine that completely disappeared in 1968 before pieces were found of it shredded at the bottom of the ocean, about 9,000 feet down. And it itself was only one of 4 submarines that completely went missing in 1968. There are more famous things such as the bloop, which was an underwater sound that was recorded across microphones about 3,000 miles apart, implying that whatever made the noise was way bigger than anything currently on our books, as well as all your general horrors about the ocean. There are countless stories of sailors who had spent long time at sea seeing the ghost of people walk across their ships, or stories of men who sit on the back of the ships at night, how they can hear singing from somewhere out across the waters. When you think of the number of people that have died in the ocean, and if you're someone who believes in the idea of haunted locations, how could there not be a more haunted and infested poltergeist than the seas themselves? There's also stories like the island of Bemaha, which is off the coast of Mexico and just disappeared. Like, this island had been charted on maps ever since the 16th century. It was a known fact that the island was right there off of the Yucatan Peninsula, and everyone knew about it, and it was even marked as recently as 1921. Then in 1997, whenever Mexico was making land deals with the United States, they said that they wanted that island, and whenever they went to like put a stake on it, they couldn't find it. And they're like, huh, that's weird. We should probably look into that. So then in 2009, they launched a full-scale search for this island, to which they determined that after hundreds of years, it just doesn't exist. Which, when you think of the ocean as being so massive that things like islands can just be there and then they can't, that is awful, and I hate it. But the seas are not only horrific for the missing persons that I've talked about earlier, and ocean monsters and ghosts and things of the like, but in a purely physical sense, they are a testament to the uselessness of humanity. Concepts such as the island of Atlantis, which it's believed by many modern historians that perhaps it was a city that sunk beneath the waves off the coast of Greece, have always stuck with people because ideas of something as important as a city to us being completely overtaken by the waves in nature is almost appalling. Whenever I think of tales like Atlantis, it reminds me of a post-apocalypse, the idea of nature reclaiming what man built no matter how much effort we put into it. There's a specific horror associated with the ocean, which I have in small spurts, known as submechanophobia, which is the fear of man-made structures beneath the water. The reason that this is so terrifying to me is because it honestly encapsulates everything that I've talked about up until this point. And that is the idea of the ocean having absolutely zero regard for you. Think about this. Any other scenario, being lost in the woods, being stuck in the middle of the desert, whatever, you still have your legs, you still have your sight, you still have the ability to move. However, the ocean does not care that we are in no way adapted to it, and that any second that we spend in it without some man-made creation is completely at its mercy. But in the same regard, the ocean doesn't really care about our understanding of it. It seems in a sort of mystic way, with stories like the Flannan Lighthouse or the crew of the Mary Celeste, that people can simply be plucked off the earth and were never given an explanation otherwise. But not only does the ocean not care about you or it care about our reasoning, it doesn't care about our monuments either. Whenever you look at images of submechanophobia and you see these great things that we built, however big or small, sentimental or otherwise, and you see them beneath the water, there's this destitute sense of something being forgotten. It's like no matter what level of sentimental nature we apply to something, as always, the ocean just doesn't care. And it almost creates this sort of weird liminal space that while we're looking at it and we want there to be some sense of cherishness or memory or just something sacred, there isn't any. Roughly 9% of species within the ocean are officially logged as to where they fit onto a larger tree, and about 20% of the ocean is charted. That means 80% of the single largest body on the entire planet is a complete mystery, as with many of the events that take place on and within it. Within the Marianas Trench, it is so deep that you can take the entirety of Mount Everest, put it at the bottom, and you would still have a mile to go before you reach surface. Think about that. The single largest thing that we can comprehend and the largest structure that we could ever imagine on land. The ocean will take all of it and bury it so deep that we would never have known otherwise if it had done so in the first place. And this is what I meant by the beginning, that it is so absolutely terrifying that there's almost a romance to it. It is wrong in every single sense that something should be wrong. It's inhuman, it's unreasonable, and it's uncaring. And it's for that reason I love stories so much of men who brave the seas and sailors and skippers and everyone else who go out into that infinite nothingness. Like, there's people who think that space is scary. I mean, you can see in space. In the ocean, it's quite literally infinite nothingness, and it doesn't even give you the courtesy of being allowed to see the infinite. And that's what's so terrifying about it, the idea of absolute abyss all around you. Whenever I tell someone I'm afraid of the ocean, a lot of them have a follow-up of, oh, do you not like sharks? Or, oh, do you not like insert some other generic creepy animal? And as a matter of fact, something like sharks would be comforting, because while it would be terrifying if, I was in the water and about to die, for sure, if I'm in the water and I see something like a shark, that is something tangible, something I can comprehend. But the idea of just a foreverness that won't even give me the courtesy of seeing, standing, or breathing within it, that's more horrific than I could ever imagine. And yet I don't have to imagine it, because it's right there and it's as real and as terrible as it possibly could be. For Halloween, I wanted to talk about something scary, and there is nothing more scary to me than the concept of the infinite that is finite. For Halloween, when a time that we're all talking about what scares us and what gets us afraid, I wanted to not only tell you these stories, but go in depth with some of my feelings towards it near the end, in order to get the point across to you why I feel the sea is both infinite in its majesty and its terror, and that there is nothing in our imaginations that can be both as beautiful and as dreadful as that of the abyss. So hopefully, if you weren't afraid of that upcoming family vacation before, I hope that you definitely are now. But what I hope even more is that you enjoyed the video, that you have a happy Halloween, and thank you for watching. Like I said, it was Halloween. I wanted to talk about the thing that's the spookiest and scariest to me, and as I hopefully got my point across in the past hour and a half of recording, I don't know how long this is going to cut down to. Hopefully I got that point across to you. So thank you so much for watching. If you're new here to this channel, there's been a lot of new people lately. Hello, hi, thank you so much for coming. And thank you for sticking around this long if you have, this late in the video. It means a lot. You are fantastic, and thank you for coming here. I love all of my viewers. You guys are great, and you give me the ability to do this, and it means the most. And I feel like October's been great. Not only has it been such a fantastic month for growth on the channel and just meeting and talking to so many lovely new people, I've also been able to really dive into a lot of the content I want to get into. And that's thanks to you all, and thank you so much. So as far as, well, let me get into my thank yous first. We have hit 750,000 subscribers, 750,000 subs. And I don't like talk about it all the time, woohoo, I made this much, because I feel like it gets a little braggadocious, and I know it can be annoying sometimes, but I really am honored and blessed in a way I can't really describe, and it's thanks to you all. So thank you for being a blessing, and it really means a lot. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead to all of my Patreons. Thank you here to my top tier patrons. You guys are fantastic. I tell you this all the time, but you're the reason that I can do this, and it means the most to me that I can do this, and thank you all so much for that. Thank you to my patrons. You guys are fantastic. I love you all to death, you know that. I'm trying to think if there's anything. Yes, so the t-shirts, which I made a community post about it. If you ordered one of the 2 new designs, because of COVID restrictions shutting down a bunch of different producers and manufacturers, I had to take those designs down, and anyone who hasn't already received a shirt or shipping should have a refund on it by now. I refunded everybody. So I'm sorry that didn't turn out the way that I hope it did. Hopefully you'll be able to go better in the future. I'm really sorry that you weren't able to get your shirts. Things happen and I try my best. So hopefully in the future I can do better. But thank you all so much for sticking with it and supporting me regardless. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I believe that's it for all that. So I will say, videos I have coming up in the future, I'm going to finish the serial killer iceberg and get in the next part of the conspiracy iceberg, because we are almost done with that and it's going to be great. Thank you all for being so patient with me in the month of October too, by the way. I wanted this month to be just scary stuff, and because of that and your all's patience, the channel has grown. Videos have done fantastic. I've got like, again, this isn't bragging, this is being thankful to you all. 3 of my videos in October have all topped 1 million views, which is something that's hard for me to even process. And you guys are fantastic, and you've allowed me to get that far, so thank you. So I believe that should do it. That should be everything. Again, I hope that you enjoyed. New videos coming out in November. We're still going up and always. It's very late. It's actually 8:30 right now, a.m. I guess I've been up all night doing this. Which is why I can't speak, but we're still going up and up, and it's all thanks to you all. So thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for supporting me. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.